Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode 2021.11. And as usual, my name is Rohan Karamandi, and I'm joined by the one and only Phil Hawthorne. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Rohan, how's it going?
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant and ESP home projects. Configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certs, or any other YAML.
2021.11, what that means is like 2 releases left for the year? Well, I guess this release and one more release, and then that's it.
One more.
Done.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That is, I know it feels like just now did they start, whether it's naming, whether it's whatever, just the 2021. Yeah, you're right. It's the year's almost there.
Yeah. All right. So should we kick it off with some new features coming in this release? So one thing that I'm very, it's a small thing, but I think it's an important one. Home Assistant now has the ability for devices or services which have their own web front end to tell Home Assistant where that is. So this is going to be a fantastic feature for all those little IoT gadgets that you've got running around the house that have their own IP address on your network, and if you need to go in and change a setting, you need to log into that IP address. I don't know about you, Rohan, but I've got a few, even not even just devices, right? Like I'm running, Grafana, Sonar, Radar, everything, right? Like everything's got an IP address and port somewhere that I have to remember. I've got a bookmarks folder somewhere.
Even if it's an API, whatever.
Yeah. So it's tricky, right? Now the integrations in Home Assistant can now report to Home Assistant, this is the URL that a user needs to go to configure it. So, for example, if you've got a Plex instance, when you set up your Plex installation with Home Assistant, you put in, I think, depending on the way you go, you either put in your IP address for your Plex server, or you might put in your Plex username and password if you've got a Plex pass and go up through the cloud, and then it will discover all your servers that way. Now, Home Assistant can tell, all right, server A is on this IP address, and there will be a little button against the device in the Home Assistant UI. So if you ever need to configure the device, you can click that button and Home Assistant will take you directly to that URL.
Interesting. That's actually really, really cool. I mean, it's funny because literally yesterday, I was trying to reset up a couple of my Wemos, and again, because for whatever reason, when I had changed around my network, whatever, there was I had forgot to set a couple of the static IPs on a couple of the Wemos that I had disconnected.
Yep.
And so now all of a sudden the IPs have changed, and it was like, okay, I can find the IPs, but then it's also labeled differently, right? So it's like, okay, well, the salt lamp isn't the salt lamp anymore, and like that kind of thing. And you move outlets here and there and things like that, and then you relabel it in Home Assistant, and then trying to map all of that. Getting the IPs wasn't hard. Getting the IPs to match the right device was the hard part, right? So this is great.
Even things like so I've got like an ESP32 for some blinds that I've got, which actually stopped working yesterday, which is quite annoying. And I have a Sensibo little air conditioning controller, where it's a cloud device. In that, it's just an ESP32, right? So when I go and log into my router, I log in and go, okay, I need to find out what the IP address is of the ESP home device, right? Everything is just called ESP32.
ESP, yeah.
Yep. I have no idea which one's which. So, and then of course you've got to know which port number you need to access on to get to the right web UI or whatever. So this is a great little addition.
So interesting. So does it only do like a web thing, or does it even discover like the API ports and things like that? So like, for example, like my Wemo wouldn't have a local web server built in, right? But it does have an API. Assuming you haven't upgraded your Wemos, but in a local device like that, that's API only. How does that work? Or does it just not find it?
I think at least in this iteration, it's designed as a user configuration URL. So like an API, they're not going to expose. So the idea is that you click the button and then you can log into the device or see the statistics or something.
Right. Okay. So it's still, I would have still been just as frustrated yesterday.
Maybe you could find the IP address or something in your Home Assistant config or something.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it's not only just for devices, it's also for services. So things like Plex, Sonar, Spotify, Pi-hole, right? And I actually, had this problem literally just last week or something, where I needed to access a service and I couldn't remember for the life of me what the IP address is in the random Docker Compose file I have on my synth. So I actually ended up going through. There's a awesome list for self-hosted, and they have amazing stuff. Check it out if you haven't already. It's an amazing list of great tools, all generally self-hosted, so pretty much open source or close enough. And one of the services I found was called Heimdall, which is basically like a bookmarks page for, I guess, your services. So I just run it through my Docker Compose, link it up, open up the port. It has a nice background, but then you go in and you add your services. So Home Assistant is in there. So, you go add a link to Home Assistant, you put in your IP address, it puts in the Home Assistant logo, and then you just go around and add all the things. The idea being that when you set up a new service, you put in, for example, if you've just set up a Plex server, you put in Plex. That way you don't have to remember, the IP address and the port number. You just have a little homepage with all your internal services that you can just click on and access, and it is fantastic. So now that Home Assistant has this, I may not need to use that as much, but yeah, I think just shows, right, like with all the IP addresses, services, and port numbers you have to remember, that's a great little feature.
It's actually a pretty cool. I mean, I know it's literally just a splash page, but
that's all it is, cool. Right? It's they're designed for server admins, sysadmins that have a whole bunch of services running on a single server, and you just want an entry point to them all without having to bookmark everything yourself.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if this also acts like some kind of a proxy, which might actually be kind of cool, where you expose this to outside and then it can get to your whatever apps, but maybe I'm thinking a little ahead.
Yeah. You are. Yeah, but I'm sure there's something that could do it, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
No, it's actually kind of cool. But yeah, no, the ability to actually go to the front end, I think it's just a nice, is it required? No, but it's definitely a nice touch.
It also helps, just reducing, if you've got an error in your Plex configuration, right?
Yeah.
Home Assistant can say, check out there's an error in your Plex integration, right? And you click on that and it says, there's an error with this is your Plex integration, there's an error. And then you've got a button right there in front of you that says open Plex configuration, right? And then bam, you're into the Plex server admin without having to fiddle around and find the IP address or port number.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a no-brainer, but sometimes it's, It took this long to get there, right? But exactly. It is nice. I definitely do appreciate that feature.
So it's rolling out to services and integrations across the platform, across Home Assistant at the moment. So now they've done a few, so including Sonos, Spotify, Sonar, Plex, Tasmoda, Pi-hole, and as I said, a whole bunch more. And I'm sure more will be added over time.
So it's not everything. It's just static kind of services that get added to it.
Yeah. So if there's an integration that they know has a static sort of site, or where they can work out, for example, like your Plex server, they can work out, right, if you're connecting to this IP address, then this is where your Plex config, this is where your Plex web server will be. Then they can add that link there.
Interesting. So if you're a specific service owner, then or integration owner rather, hopefully that means that you can just kind of go back and it's a quick step to get to these services, whatever that might be, right? From a developer perspective, so that you can actually just go in and quickly add that and say, look for the URL here, and off you go.
Yeah, I think they also released as part of the beta, or just even before the beta, they on the Home Assistant devs Twitter, they released updates for people that make custom Home Assistant integrations to say, hey, we're introducing this feature. If you want to add it for your integration, this is what you need to do. So I'm guessing there's going to be a whole bunch of updates coming through hacks as well for those custom components to support it.
Yeah, which is great. All right. Another new feature, entity categories. Now, before you get too excited, you can't categorize your entities, as the name would suggest. But essentially what's happening is we have various types of entities, and Home Assistant is breaking it down into 3 different types, specifically primary, configuration, and diagnostic. Basically, what happens is primary entities are those entities that get exposed to things like your Google Home or the Amazon Echo devices, but and the other ones aren't exposed. So again, when we're talking about a primary entity, that could be something like a switch or something like that. The configuration entity might be something like a thing that says, okay, I mean, in the example of a Dyson fan, you might have, again, your on-off switch as your primary. You might have a oscillate switch or something like that as a configuration. So it's to go a little bit deeper into that device and make whatever kind of change or tweak into that device. And then your diagnostic entity might be like, hey, this is what you have remaining on a filter or something like that, right? So that might be kind of akin to how that would be set up. Now, to me, the fact that a configuration entity, if it's something like an oscillate switch or a night mode toggle or something like that, if that doesn't show up, I kind of do want that in my Amazon Echo, right? To say like, hey, what's your face? Turn on night mode or turn on or oscillate the fan or whatever that is, right? So now hopefully that doesn't mean that I have to set up a switch with an automation to trigger this other switch that, jumping through hoops, right? Like the diagnostic piece, fine, I get. I don't care to ask, at least me personally, I don't care to ask my, voice assistant to say, what's left on my battery or on my filter or whatever. It'd be cool, but I don't care that much. It's not functionally relevant, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Phil?
So it's interesting. I was in 2 minds about it when I read this, and when I installed the beta, I actually got caught out with a few of the integrations that have changed over, because this is like a pretty big breaking change in this release, I think. And there's no generally when they do a massive breaking change, they'll give like 2 release warnings, right? But there's no warning in this one. So first of all, I always found it frustrating in Home Assistant when I would link up a new device, taking the example of a Sonos speaker, right? I'd link up a Sonos speaker and, as part of the Sonos speaker would come in, like a switch for a alarm and then a sensor for, is night mode on or whatever. And all those would immediately, like I would look at my phone and there'll be like an alert from the Amazon Echo app saying, hey, we've discovered 17 new devices on your network. And then I'm like, what are these 17 new devices? And they're all linked to that one Sonos speaker that I've just added into Home Assistant, right? Because it's added in, all the sensors, all the switches, right? And then you go and say to the little lady, hey, turn on the living room speaker, right? And she doesn't know which entity to use. So from that point of view, I'm really happy that this is in now, because it sort of, as a new user experience, when, you add a speaker, you just want that one entity to come in, the primary entity to go in to those, external parties, right? I did, taking the example of the Sonos speaker, I found that one of the, I think it is a breaking change in this release, there's a Sonos set service or set option service in Home Assistant that's been removed. That was a breaking change for me. So then I use that service to turn some lights on some speakers on and off. So to restore that, I then had to go into the device config, and I had to enable those particular features, or those particular switches to come back. Right, they were disabled by default. So it was a bit confusing at first, but I understand why they've done it. So I think it's probably for the best. I think it's going to be a bit challenging for people upgrading and seeing, maybe all your services no longer existing, entities that you thought would be exposed to your Google Home or Amazon Echo no longer there.
Yeah, and hopefully the things are categorized properly. Like again, the example that with the fan that I used was arbitrary, right? Like not necessarily exactly indicative of how that feature works, but hopefully those are categorized properly so that whoever's building these integrations realizes, hey, maybe this is something we want to expose to whatever, and that should be a primary switch rather than a secondary kind of or a primary entity rather than a secondary thing. So I mean, in the blog post, the example they use is a light bulb, right, where the light itself is an ND, but the the power on configuration is a configuration. Which that's fine. I'm not going to be telling my voice assistant, when my bulb turned, when I lose power, it should and gain it back, it should automatically do this. Fine, not the biggest deal. Yeah. Right. My concern is that, a couple of these might get switched around where it might cause some breaking changes to a decent degree. Right. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
And I think, and I think probably the biggest thing that might catch a few people off now is, and if I'm reading the breaking changes correctly, is that for these secondary and diagnostic sensors, or basically for the secondary, switches, if you have them in like a Home Assistant group, for example, and you have like a service, group dot turn off, group dot, Sonos night mode, right? For those secondary switches that aren't, the primary media player component or something, they will no longer respond to those service calls from Home Assistant. So if you have them in a Home Assistant group, the service call won't do anything. What you'll need to do is you'll need to go in and specify that particular entity ID. So for the example of the Sonos night mode, if I had a group of all my Sonos speakers having a night mode in one group, I couldn't do that from a Home Assistant group. I would have to then, replace that call and specify each individual speaker as the entity ID and turn that switch off. I think that's going to catch a few people off guard, maybe. Particularly, there's no real way to work out, is this a primary or secondary, entity unless you go into the device config and see where it lies in those categories.
Yeah. And hopefully that is streamlined. Again, I haven't played with this myself where, having seen those multiple, I'm looking at the GitHub right now of the PR. Mm-hmm. But I haven't seen that in mine yet. But I'm sure it's coming. There's just, again, looking through the release notes, there's a ton of stuff that's affected, right? Like and these are some major integrations too, right? WLED, Synology, NAS, Shelly, Xiaomi, the Xiaomi Mio, Brother, MQTT, like SwitchBot. There's a bunch of stuff that's affected. Again, I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. I'm just hoping that it's not done in a or it is done in a thought out way, rather.
Yeah, and I think with a big change like this, there's always going to be someone that this doesn't work for. I was lucky enough that I think I just had to update some calls to that Sonos set service, or set option service, I should say, and maybe get a few other things around the place. But yeah, I think just depending on the way you're using your devices and those things around them.
Yeah.
But onto other things. So there's been major updates to Tuya in this release. So I don't know if you've been following Frank's Twitter or not, but he has. But did you see you posted up a picture full of a whole bunch of Tuya devices? One, I was very jealous.
Yeah.
If he gets to spend his days, just playing with all these, fun, awesome IoT gadgets. But yeah, he's been hard at work making the Tuya integration more solid. There's a whole bunch of new devices now supported. I believe it's all going to be via the cloud as well. So this isn't a local 2-year replacement. They're still missing the locks and remotes, but yeah, great work, Mr. Frank.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was funny. One day I opened Twitter and I just see like Frank going on a rampage.
yeah,
with
yeah,
just
he had like
knocking
a
out a bunch of
big Twitter
bugs, a
thread on it,
bunch of
right? Like
whatever. It's
it was like live tweeting his whole experience, right?
Which Frank, I know you listen to the show. Just keep doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's amazing just watching you kind of go through just those and knocking out like 30 different like things all at once. It's I don't know. I found it. I don't know if I want to call it entertaining, but I definitely found it like holy crap! Like you're just picking one entity and just or one integration and just rebuilding it from the ground up, right? And the Tuya stack is fairly large, so
yeah, it's interesting because I know, like in the last release, Tuya, that was the first release of the Tuya official integration, and they were only missing covers. I wonder what's prompted Frank to go in and sort of rewrite it. Like, is this the same? Is he improving the official tier integration? Is this like another tier integration? Like, obviously, it's better for Home Assistant that the tier integration is more solid. But I just was hoping with the official, like with 2 actually running with it, that this wouldn't have been required. But we'll see. Maybe I've missed something there.
Well, I mean, regardless, I mean, it's again, I'm always about stability and all and all of that. So
yeah,
no matter what it is, thank you, Frank, for that one. I don't even use Tuya devices and still thank you for that one. All right. What else? Icon picker. So now you can change an entity's icon just within Home Assistant, so you don't necessarily need to know the MDI or the material design code for it, right? So if you have customized some of your icons in the past, you'll know that you need to type like MDI : whatever the material design icon name is. And if you're not familiar with that, basically material design icons are a standard set of icons that you see for, used throughout different applications, whatever, right? They might be emojis, there might be different like icons, like the lightning bolt to say, a device is turned on or off or whatever that is.
Yep.
And it's a standard set of standard set of icons, known as material design icons. But now there's an icon picker, so you don't actually need to know that code or anything like that. There's actually a really good Visual Studio or VS Code,
there is
plugin for that too, which I use just so I know I'm using the right one. So sometimes it's like I want an outline, sometimes I want a full filled in one, whatever that is. I don't remember what it's called. I'll find out and put it in the show notes. But this is nice because you don't need to do that. So which I kind of like.
This is one of those things where I'm like, really? Like this, I knew it wasn't there, but now that you think about it, you're like, yeah, like an icon picker probably would have been a good idea.
Makes sense.
A fair few releases ago, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. But again, I'm glad it's there.
Yeah, and of course, open source. I could have just put a pull request in, but there you go.
Yep.
All right. So the next one's, let me try and explain it. I think it's a pretty good feature though. So offset for time triggers. So you can have date time entities in Home Assistant. So the most common would be if you have a smart speaker or something like that, which might have an alarm. So for example, on Sonos speakers, if you have an alarm set, they expose an entity in Home Assistant, which is just a date time, right? With when the alarm is going to go off in the future. So It might be, tomorrow at 7 a.m. You can then, in your automation, you can then use that sensor as a trigger value. So for example, trigger this automation at the time of, the next alarm. You can now add an offset against those time triggers. So if you have an alarm for 7 a.m., you can then say 5 minutes beforehand or 5 minutes after that alarm, trigger this automation. So this would be good if you have, like a morning wake up routine. Maybe you've got those lights that you want to, slowly mimic sunrise coming in 5 minutes before your alarm. You can now do this without needing to go in. And previously you would have to create, like a template sensor, calculate, when's it firing, do 5 minutes beforehand. All that sort of stuff. So yeah. No longer have to do that. It's all can be done in YAML. So fantastic little feature.
That is actually pretty cool. It's a little things that kind of help here and there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. let's talk new integrations. Again, there's not a ton here to talk about this week, but look in. So I guess they provide, focus on providing devices, that integrate something with like a local API. So that is now supported. So if you use something like, it's basically it's a universal remote that, integrates with different like Google Assistant, blah, 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 whatever. But yeah, if you use this,
like a IR blaster, like maybe like control your infrared air conditioner or something with it.
Yeah, I think it's more meant for like smart devices, right? So it's got like, again, like native HomeKit support, so on and so forth. So basically to act as a bridge to IR devices, like you said, but to bring those into whatever, the modern world, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got like a crappy old air conditioner that uses just IR and nothing smart, well, great. Looks like you can pop this in. And I might be very wrong here, but this is just, browsing the website. That's kind of the gist I'm getting.
I think it was a Kickstarter. So looks.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
This actually looks pretty neat. But again, it's, come join us on Product Hunt. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not too bad. It's like $60. It's not the cheapest, but it's not expensive.
It sounds like a similar competitor to like the Broadlink RM Pro, right?
Yeah. It's not. I don't see it being like a replacement for like a Logitech Harmony or something like that. I think it's more kind of just bringing kind of the old school devices into the modern world. I mean, unless you have a really old TV that doesn't have any kind of smart features or anything like that, and it's IR only, then cool. This might work for you, but regardless, so that integration is now in Home Assistant, which is kind of cool. Learn something new about a product.
There you go. Other noteworthy changes: Nest has Web RTC support, and they've also added support for Nest battery cameras and battery doorbells, which is quite interesting. I know. So I've got the Ring video doorbell, which is battery powered, and I think I can get like the latest snapshot from the Ring servers, which I have to pay a subscription for.
Yeah.
But I can't view like live, footage from that camera.
Yeah.
I've also got a Reolink solar powered camera as well. Once again, right? Like because it's solar powered, there is no ability for me to tie it into like a Blue Iris or get a live feed in Home Assistant, right? Because
takes too much battery. Yeah,
exactly. So if that support is there from the Nest battery operated cameras, that is really cool, because that's like one of the drawbacks of going battery for me. Like you can't view a live feed in Home Assistant because of the battery.
So I wonder how they get around, I don't think they're getting around it. I wonder what kind of an effect that has on battery, right? So even if you are using this, I don't, is it a good idea?
I assume like maybe it's not like running a live feed. Maybe you'd have to like trigger the live feed or something. Assuming live feed is supported,
right?
To save the battery, and then it would have a timeout, I'm sure. But yeah, like because I know like with the Reolink, they're just like, no, these cameras do not support any of those protocols, like OnVIF or RTSP. Right? They're just like, no, do not support it. We're not allowing it, right? So yeah, very cool.
Yeah, no, that's neat. Another noteworthy change, a tampered device class is now available for binary sensors. So if there's some kind of like a device tampering sensor on there, whatever, on whatever device you're talking about, that can now be brought in as its own device class, which is kind of cool. I haven't really seen anything that would have that, but I'm sure that it's out there if it's being built.
Pretty popular in things like Z-Wave and Zigbee, like motion sensors. Like I think the idea being that, if you were to walk up to a motion sensor and change its batteries, because it detects it's vibrating all of a sudden, it will then trigger to your Z-Wave controller to say, hey, I'm not in a normal state here, right? Like something's being tampered with. And then you can do like different automation, right? So then you could trigger an alarm or a siren, I guess, which Home Assistant now has as of, a couple of releases ago. So very cool. I think Frank added this because he was working on the Tuya devices and they had tamper stuff. So
interesting. Yeah,
add support for it. and then we can extend it out to Z-Wave and Zigbee and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Another cool integration, or another cool noteworthy change, I should say, is support for fan groups. So if you're familiar with light groups, you could, if you've got multiple lights from different manufacturers and you want to group them all together as a single entity in Home Assistant, you can do that. Now you can also do it with fans. So, if you've got like a Dyson fan, a Xiaomi fan, maybe a big ass fan in your ceiling, you can have them all grouped as a single entity in Home Assistant. Turn them on to level 1. They will all turn on to the same level 1 applicable setting for that platform at the same time, and then turn that one single fan off and all fans turn off. So very cool.
All right. Some breaking changes. Obviously, there's more in the release notes. These are just a quick overview of what's there. So if you're running your own... if you're running Home Assistant in your own environment, this would kind of affect you, but Python 8 is now deprecated and will be removed in 2022.1. Support for 3.10 isn't really there yet, so you should really upgrade to 3.9. Again, if you're doing, whether it's, Home Assistant OS, supervised container, whatever that is, you don't have to worry about. If you're dealing with a virtual environment or some other custom installation, then you have to worry about it. Other than that, you don't really need to do anything about it. Home Assistant will take care of all that.
It's interesting that, I know it's probably affects, like a small percentage of users, but it's interesting that they're deprecating Python 8 without having support for, Python 10 out.
Yeah.
And I should say like Python 3.10. They haven't finished that yet. I mean, maybe they, know, it's only a little bit left to go. We'll have it out in the next release or something, which is fair enough. But it just, I don't know, like it seems very premature to say, hey, we haven't finished support for 3.10, but, bam, here's, we're now deprecating, because I know they want to keep only 2 cycles behind, but.
Yeah, unless the idea is, they're going to be having 3.10 support before 2022.1.
Yeah, I imagine they would. And this puts them under like a bit of pressure to now do it, right? Like, because otherwise, if they don't come 2022.1, they're only going to have one version of Python officially supported, right? So,
it might be, but I don't see that happening, but it might be.
Yeah, I'm sure they've got. It just seems like a bit premature for me to like. I don't know. It's just my personal thing, right? Like, I wouldn't say, hey, we've only got one official supported version, right? Yeah. But that's just my personal preference. Anyway, so another set of breaking changes, which is potentially going to have a bit of an impact if you've been around with Home Assistant for a while, or maybe you've set up the recorder in a certain way. The Home Assistant project is now going to explicitly define a set of databases that will be supported by the recorder component. So only the following databases will be supported after 2022.1. That is MariaDB greater than 10.3, MySQL greater than 8.0, PostgreSQL greater than 12, and SQLite greater than 3.32.1. If you are using any other integration for the recorder component, it will not be supported. And after 2022.1, the recorder just won't record any entries to it. So when I saw this, I'm like, that's it. I set up my MySQL Docker container like years ago. I'm sure it's not upgraded enough. I'm going to have to, restart everything. But luckily, I haven't seen the warning in my config, so I assume I'm safe. But I'm sure there's people out there that are going to be caught out by that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess once in a while, it's okay to do that. But again, I understand that they don't want to sit there and support like Oracle database for the 2 people that use Home Assistant with that, right? Like that part makes sense. And it sounds like they've got, for the most part, most of the majority ones, right? And then what's neat is, again, they can see for people that have telemetry turned on, I'm guessing they can see which of these integrations they have. I haven't actually looked, so I might just be blindly saying that, but.
No, but that's probably what's fed into this, why they've gone with this decision, right? They can see, all right, if we're going to support X amount of people have MySQL, let's make sure that we at least support this version because it's considered latest.
Yeah. Well, and to me that makes sense, right? Like again, it's not about the version numbers for me. It's more about the actual platform, right? And again, between Postgres, MySQL, Maria, and SQLite, I think they're fairly covered. Now, again, people might be, getting their pitchforks ready to to go yell at somebody because whatever they use isn't supported. But again, keeping in mind that this is meant to it's meant to streamline, what's the word I'm looking for? It's meant to streamline the developer's ability to maintain the software, right? So again, understandable.
We've got to remember, I think, and I'm just, spitballing here. I have no inside knowledge here, that with all the recent, statistics and long-term statistics changes that they're introducing, right, this is where that data is going to be. And you'll notice that, all the databases that are going to be officially supported now are SQL based, right? So they clearly, by just limiting to those, types of databases and those versions, they're going to ensure that, when they come to do some more advanced long-term statistics and keeping indexes in order and keeping that database running smooth and fast, it makes perfect sense. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, will your custom database, whatever, not custom, but will a non-supported database still work? Maybe, I don't know, but it's definitely recommended to go with one of these ones, right? I mean, again, Microsoft SQL isn't on there, Oracle isn't on there. Again, this isn't meant for those use cases anyways for the most part, but
and plus I guess as they start doing migrations and updates, you might not get those new table keys or columns or anything like that, so eventually that'll stop working.
And I mean, worst case, I'm sure somebody will come out with some kind of custom component that supports it's just this is the official project, won't be supporting that, right? Which I'm okay with. I don't know. Moving on, the Xiaomi Mio. So if you use the Xiaomi Mio platform, attributes for some of the vacuum entities have been replaced with sensors. So again, if you have anything around that, then you should probably look at this.
So I think that that's going to be related to those primary, secondary, sensors. I think over the coming releases, we're going to see a few platforms doing this. Removing those attributes and putting them out into sensors. And Xiaomi, vacuum cleaners are very popular in the community, so I think this is going to affect a few people.
Yeah.
All right, Simply Safe. If you're using the Simply Safe integration, it now requires a new web-based authentication method. So when you start up, Home Assistant's going to automatically prompt you to reauthorize your instance. So you probably get a little notification in Home Assistant, and then just log in and go into the integrations page and reauthorize your app configuration there.
Yep. Sonos. The Sonos.set option service has been removed, and instead now it has individual switch entities, which kind of controls the features and the display, right? So, that's one change, but there's actually a couple more. The night sound and speech enhance attributes are also removed. So, if you're using these, then you probably want to replace them with the switch entities. Now, again, it sounds like these might be related to some of those changes that we talked about earlier.
This is definitely what I got caught out. Actually, I just realized as you were saying that, those attributes, the night sound and speech enhance attributes, they were I think I had originally created template sensors to handle all that. I'm just going to have to remove those template switches and replace them with the official switches now. I mean, it's going to be more solid moving forward.
I was going to say, in that case, it might not be a bad thing, right? Just again, it's not a workaround.
Yeah. All right, and some integrations leaving in this release. We've talked about these have been deprecated for quite some time. Ascent, Lyft, Nello, and of course the Wink integration. Bye bye. So
RIP.
Yeah. Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah. For as long as you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have those platforms, just don't.
Delete them, yeah. I think delete them from your config. You're just going to cause errors. They're done. They're not going to do anything for you now.
Yeah.
And that is 2021.11.
That's right.
Cool.
All right.
Well, yeah. Thanks everyone for listening. Well, I'm going to go and add more services to my Heimdall dashboard now, I think. The ones
That's awesome.
I can't remember, right? Like it all started because I couldn't find the port number for ESP Home.
Stupid URL,
And
yeah.
yeah, like I got so frustrated. I knew it was on a Docker container somewhere. I'm like, that's it. I need to know where to act. Like I didn't have it bookmarked. I'm like, I'm doing this, right? And so there, it's born. Now I've got something else to manage and kill my time with, all right?
There you go.
Yeah. Nothing, and I will be the only one that ever used it, so I don't care.
Yes.
All right, nice talking to you. I'll speak to you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@haspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant Podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics we discussed today, check out our show notes on haspodcast.io.